Sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
Colleagues, agriculture ministers, high representatives of international organizations, viewers from around the world, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the Agriculture Ministers' Conference today, the annual political highlight of the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture, the GFFA. It is a first for me, a premiere, and I'm proud, as the German Agriculture Minister, to be part of this international community. I wish to have a close international cooperation between agriculture ministers, because we are facing enormous challenges worldwide, which we can only tackle by working together. And first and foremost, the global climate crisis. It leads to droughts, storms, and floods worldwide. Eastern Africa is currently facing its worst famine for 35 years due to an ongoing drought. The soaring costs for inputs, such as fertilizers and seed, are hitting many farmers hard. Livestock keepers in some countries are confronted with animal diseases such as the African swine fever. And on top of this, there is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. All of this makes it more difficult to achieve the essential goal of a world without hunger by 2030 and also to implement other sustainability goals of the 2030 Agenda. The 2021 United Nations Food Systems Summit provided some important impetus for sustainable food systems. And now we must work hand in glove to put our goals into action. It is therefore an important signal that the 14th GFFA is devoted to the role of land and soils in fulfilling the right to food. Soil. That may sound at first like something that can be taken for granted. If you went to a shopping center in Berlin and asked someone whether they had already thought of soil today, you would probably receive some strange looks. Unless, of course, you happen to be speaking to someone from the agricultural sector, as soil, for most people, is something that is naturally there, something you don't have to bother about. In German, we actually have a saying, to pull the ground out from underneath someone's feet, which means nothing else but taking away someone's basis, someone's foundation. In life, we need ground under our feet, and healthy soils, healthy ground are the foundation of all forms of agriculture, and the sustainable use is essential in order to preserve biodiversity and keep the climate crisis at bay. With soil protection and humus formation, we can help curb the climate crisis and improve adaptation to climate change. And at the same time, we must prevent even further degradation of our soils. A fifth of land worldwide is degraded. That affects over 3.2 billion people in our world. We need innovative solutions, as well as long-term investment, in order to restore our soils, so that they can fulfill their important functions for humans, climate, and our nature. It remains our ambitious goal to achieve worldwide land degradation neutrality by 2030. We have soil sealing due to housing development and infrastructure measures. A lot of our agricultural land and valuable ecosystems continue to be lost. This leads to a global loss of 10 million hectares of fertile arable land each year. Soil sealing must be minimized, reduced, and wherever possible, reversed. Another aspect is the conservation and the protection of soil health, as well as soil fertility and soil biodiversity. To do this, we need sustainable soil and land management. For instance, by reducing the use of plant protection agents to the minimum amount that we need, and using fertilizers more sustainably. But what is essential is that we have a fair access to land and the protection of land use rights. Wherever they are not in place, We must support states in establishing rules for the purchase, acquisition, and use of land. Because we see that in many countries of our world, land is being bought by investors who are not from the agricultural sector, and then this land can no longer be managed by our farmers. In many cases, the young generation can no longer finance the high land prices from what they earn. Only last Saturday, I was called upon and encouraged by a number of civil society organizations to take action against this concentration of land and also against land speculation. And I will be glad to do that, together with you, esteemed colleagues. Agricultural land should be used first and foremost to feed the people, today, but also in future. And to this end, land needs to be managed sustainably. Esteemed colleagues, it is our joint task, and this task is enormous. Everything I have just described is the necessary prerequisite for being able to conserve the valuable ecosystem of soil and to be able to manage the land. Of course, all these measures to protect our soils must be site-adapted. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. But the threat to land and soil is a global problem. And it is essential that we, as the international community of agriculture ministers, agree to protect them. However, the measures that have been presented over the last few years in many different GFFA events, and some of you in your video messages also mentioned, must be implemented at local level. In German, we have another saying: preparing the ground for something. That is, laying the foundation, making a start, and I hope that this conference will contribute to that. I am very confident that we can all succeed at this. And this is my aim, and I look forward to working with you.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
distinguished colleagues, a key aspect of the GFFA are the two high-level panels. The panels are used for international experts, ministers, to present their view on this year's topic. Possible solutions and challenges were discussed, and current and future trends were presented. The audience also was involved. And I want to hand the floor to the EU Commission, as well as the World Committee for Food Security. I want to thank you for hosting this event, and I would be delighted to give the floor to you to present your impression of the panels as well as the current situation. Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Minister Özdemir. Dear Ministers, I'm very happy to be invited to the ministerial conference. I think this is a very important format to exchange views on agriculture and to work closely together to address issues that the sector is facing. On Tuesday, I had the honor of hosting the European Union's customary high-level panel. I had the pleasure of being joined by Minister Unduraga of Chile, President Simadala of the East African Farmers Federation, and Professor Swiner, Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute. First of all, I wish to take this opportunity to thank the panelists for their valuable time and sharing their insights. I also thank Minister Özdemir, firstly, for hosting this year GFFA, and secondly, for his kind video message, which set the scene so well for our panel. The title of the panel was Better Stewards of the Earth, How Can We Use Soil More Sustainably? The basis of our discussion was how to strike a balance between the sustainable use of soil and meeting the growing consumer demand for agri-food products. We also considered the role that public policy can and should play in this equation, particularly in conserving and improving the health of the soil upon which agriculture production relies. I would like to share 3 takeaway messages from our panel. Number 1 is agricultural land and the fertile soil is a finite and precious resource. 1 centimeter of fertile soil can take up to 1,000 years to form, but can be lost in a matter of minutes. 1 handful of soil contains more organisms than a billion than there are humans on the planet. And we rely on soil for over 90% of our food. Number 2, we want to preserve soil's ability to feed generations of our children and grandchildren. We need to manage it sustainably. And we need to start doing so today. And number 3, to make the transition to sustainable soil management, we need to involve research and innovation. International agri-food policy must include efforts to help farmers around the world take advantage of the innovative solutions being developed to tackle the challenges on the ground. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender des Welternährungsausschusses.
Thank you.
Ich darf jetzt Sie Ihre Eindrücke.
Chair of the Committee on World Food Security, may I ask to share your impressions now?
Thank you, Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first to express my deepest gratitude to our host, Minister Özdemir, for inviting the Committee on World Food Security, the CFS, to organize this second high-level panel, which focused on the critical importance of land tenure and governance for sustainable land use and healthy soils. In this high-level panel, we overviewed the uptake, the impact, lessons learned, and the contributions to the SDGs of the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests, the commonly known as the VGGTs of the CFS. These guidelines were adopted 10 years ago at the committee as internationally negotiated framework to improve land governance with human rights at the center. On his remarks at the opening of the high-level panel, Minister Özdemir provided an holistic perspective and highlighted the important role of soils and land for a wide range of SDGs to fight against poverty and inequalities and for climate action. In these lines, Her Excellency Frida Krivka, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development of Albania, spoke to the critical role of gender equality around issues of tenure. These reflections brought us to a first conclusion, which is the need for integration, adopting a food systems approach that urges us to refrain from looking to the issues of land in isolation of biodiversity, climate, landscapes, rural prosperity, social justice, and the empowerment of smallholders and family farmers. We noted the potentials of bringing together our national pathways for achieving food security and nutrition in an integrated manner with all of the SDGs, with the NDCs, and with the national adaptation programs of action. Joining participants in celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the adoption of the CFS voluntary guidelines on tenure, Minister Özdemir noted that the guidelines are making an important contribution by securing property, use rights, and equitable access to land, fisheries, and forests. This was also supported by the speakers from the CGIAR, civil society, and the private sector, who also highlighted the importance of youth and women's empowerment. FAO's chief economist, Dr. Máximo Toredo, provided evidence of the uptake of the voluntary guidelines on land tenure around the world, up to 133 countries in different ways, and detailed the most valuable efforts by FAO to support 78 countries on the adoption of the guidelines. However, we also realized that despite encouraging examples of implementation and impact of the voluntary guidelines, the scale is not yet enough, and the world's attention on land tenure has slid down the global priority list over the years. Hence, our second conclusion is a strong plea for an urgent recommitment to existing global frameworks, such as the voluntary guidelines on tenure, as well as to others equally needed for sustainable land use, such as the principles for responsible investments in agriculture, or the CFS policy recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches recently adopted. The third conclusion of the session is the need to think and not act local. This was exemplified by His Excellency Ibrahim Touré, Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Marine Resources of Sierra Leone. He noted the importance of giving an inclusive and bottom-up approach to developing their national frameworks for tenure governance, including traditional leaders, local authorities, civil society, and other stakeholders. And that's our last conclusion at the high-level panel. The session called for the need to connect globally, calling on governments and other stakeholders to make use of the Committee on World Food Security and to connect the negotiations and agreements in this arena with those under the COPs on climate, biodiversity, and desertification, with the World Health Assembly, World Environmental Assembly, and other multilateral fora. I thank you, and over to you, Excellency.
Vielen Dank, Herr Ferreiro de Loma Osorio.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel Ferreiro de Loma Osorio. It is a good thing that you have focused on the VGGTs and the significance of your committee in your panel. I am now looking forward to our report on the side event on trade. Mr. Pugam, the Deputy Director General of the FAO, will present his report. Mr. Pugam, with the side event, we have presented a forum to discuss the results of the GFFA 2022 concerning trade. It was agreed that 2 years later it would be discussed how agricultural trade policy has developed since then. Mr. Pugam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister Özdemir. Excellencies, dear ministers. I'd like just to remind that the panel that the Minister Özdemir just alluded to was composed of Commissioner for Agriculture of the European Union, Janis Wojciechowski, the Honorable Ruben Mtolo-Firi, Minister of Agriculture for Zambia, and Mr. Paul Sampson, who is Associate Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food from Canada. And as we all recall, the 2020 edition of the GFFA looked at the role of trade in food security and how to make trade work for a secure, diverse, and sustainable nutrition. The communique was adopted just before the COVID pandemic began to spread more rapidly worldwide. It was therefore in this context that the panel discussions focused on trade, and more specifically, the issues addressed in the Communique 2020 were divided in 4 blocks: the role of trade in food security, innovation and technology and how to put them at the service of agricultural development, inclusivity, sustainability and safety aspects of food value chains, and trade rules and the way trade rules can be enhanced for the benefit of all. So several key messages emerged from the discussions. First, it was noted that while the world has changed, the role of agricultural trade has not. Trade is essential to fighting extreme poverty and ensuring global food security by improving the availability and accessibility of food and the stability of the food supply. It was noted that the pandemic has further highlighted this importance of trade. Second, innovation and technology have a key role to play in achieving much needed productivity gains and improving the sustainability of agricultural production. The importance of networks between farmers, researchers, and other stakeholders for technology transfer was particularly emphasized. Third, to make food value chains more inclusive, sustainable, and safe, a process of interagency collaboration is needed. I would like to insist on that. That was a strong message of the panel. The participation of actors from the whole value chain is necessary, including those involved in production, transportation, trade, energy, health, plant quarantine, and many other services. Action at all levels, multilateral, regional, bilateral, is also needed. Fourth, it was noted that a rule-based trading system is essential because it improves predictability, disciplines trade distorting measures, and resolves disputes, among other things. It was emphasized that agricultural trade should be regulated through science-based and rule-based approaches, and that global inclusion is essential for a fairer trading system. As the WTO Director General recently emphasized, trade is part of the solution, not the problem. I would like ministers to conclude by reiterating in front of you that we have an opportunity with the upcoming WTO Ministerial Conference to make a real difference by further strengthening the existing trading room. This concludes my report. Thank you, Minister. Over to you, Minister Özdemir.
Lieber Herr Pogam, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you, Mr. Pogam. This shows how important international in agricultural products is for the sustainable food and nutrition for our global population. And I am sure that this topic will also come up in future GFFAs. The communiqué of 2020 also underlined that in the run-up to the WTO Ministerial Conference wanted to cooperate constructively in order to have a positive result. What we didn't know at the time, this ministerial conference, it was planned for the summer of 2020, but it had to be postponed due to the pandemic. And I would like to ask you, colleagues, to be committed to this demand. And Mr. Pogam, I wish all of us that this ministerial conference will take place successfully. Before we go to our breakout sessions, I want to ask the young farmers, and I want to welcome them. I invited them in order to show this perspective of the younger generation, that they can express their expectations vis-à-vis policymakers and give us impetus for our work. 15 young farmers from 13 countries were selected with the help of the World Farmers Association, and for weeks they have been meeting virtually to exchange views, experiences, and they drafted their own declaration. So now I would like to ask the delegates of the Young Farmers Forum, Ms. Zimmermann from Brazil and Mr. Mumunga from Zimbabwe, to take the floor.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity. Farming is our passion and our profession. Farming should be a business that allows making a living by improving the environment rather than just exploiting it. We need circumstances that are likely to form entrepreneurs. We call upon policymakers to provide a framework that will help to make sustainable farming that takes care of economic, environmental, and social aspects. We understand that we borrow the land of the future generations, and we endeavor to leave it in a better state than we received it. Food security starts with the soil. In order to protect it and to restore degraded soil, we need to increase organic matter and adopt on a larger scale more sustainable practices, such as cover cropping, conservation agriculture, climate-smart agriculture, integrated landscape approaches, agroecology, and other dynamic biosystems. To make this transition, education is imperative. To feed a hungry planet, we need to be anchored by good science and technology. Farmers need to be educated as to which farming practices are suitable as restoring the soils in their particular area and also climatic conditions. Also, raising awareness of consumers on the way food is produced would make them more conscious of the food they purchase, increasing the demand for more sustainable grown food. Public policies should encourage the use of these good practices and to differentiate between needs of different farm sizes, focusing on farms most in need. Lower tax rates, subsidies over credit interest rates, or insurance might be a good incentive for big companies and family-owned farmers to apply soil protection practices. And rotational grazing and no-till practices have the potential to transform farming and ranching into activities that capture carbon instead of just emitting it. In addition to helping with climate changes, access brings many opportunities along with the creation of a whole new market. And now I hand over to my colleague, Christian Manunga.
Thank you for that. We believe that science and technology, with the goal of improving productivity, is needed to feed a hungry planet. To make this work, governments should design spatial planning instruments, allowing balancing different interests and preserving agricultural land, which is needed enough to provide enough food for everyone. To make sure everyone has fair access to land, it is crucial to have a functional property law. Governments must support family farmers and new farmers with subsidies and buying land and equipment or machines. Gender equality is of key importance. It also needs to be addressed, as women need to have equal access as men have when land is being allocated. Finally, we also believe that it is important that we as farmers unite and connect to exchange good practices and create innovation and increased network for us to have sustainable farming solutions. We also need to make sure that we integrate cities and those in the cities for increased production and productivity. We would also like to thank you for this time that you have given us to present to you what we feel that you need to deliberate on during your deliberations. And we hope and wish you the best during the deliberations, and note that we will be here to judge you in the future. So probably please remember us when you're making these decisions. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank für Ihr Statement.
Thank you for your statement, which I have in my hands here. Your voice will not only be heard, but it will also be taken into account in the future discussions. I want to thank, on behalf of all of us, for your commitment and your declaration. I wish you all the best for the future, and stay healthy, of course. This brings me to end of the first plenary of the conference. We will continue in the breakout sessions in a few minutes. Traditionally, this gives us the opportunity to have discussions in a smaller round, to exchange views, to discuss how we can make sustainable land use, soil conservation, and fair access to land a reality. We want to exchange views on the good practices, the good examples that we already have, policy approaches in different countries that are already being applied. They can serve as a momentum, as an example. And how can we implement the communiqué in practice and find practical solutions? That is the core question of our breakout sessions on the four topics of the GFFA: soil health, soil restoration, scarce land resources, and access to land, as well as securing land rights, land use rights in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, agriculture ministers, high representatives of international organizations, I wish you all fruitful discussions and insightful conversations in the breakout sessions. We will reconvene at 2 p.m. in the second plenary. And to our audience globally, I want to say this is the end of the public session of the Agriculture Ministers Conference. Let me say thank you and goodbye. I would like to invite you to join us again for the press conference at 3:30.